The complex equations trembled on the handwritten pages as calculators stared at calculations that could save 10,000 lives or doom them all. Across the prison library table, the quiet woman who had once taught MIT's brightest minds was about to reveal a mathematical error so catastrophic it would change everything he thought he knew about the power of numbers to heal rather than destroy. Dr. Sienna Vasquez had been solving equations at Millbrook Women's Correctional for exactly 1,847 days when she first noticed the man they called Calculator, approaching her library table with suspicion and desperate curiosity. Not because Elena was counting down to freedom. She still had 2 years remaining on her sentence for academic fraud. She marked time in mathematical sequences because precision had always been her anchor, the difference between theoretical breakthroughs that advanced human knowledge and computational errors that could cascade into disasters. At 58, Elena carried herself with the careful precision of someone who had spent 32 years working with mathematical concepts so complex that most people couldn't understand their implications. Her graying hair was always pulled back practically, her hands bore ink stains from decades of writing equations, and her eyes held the patient focus of someone who understood that mathematical truth was absolute and unforgiving. Dr. Elena Vasquez was not just any mathematician. Before her career was destroyed by accusations of falsifying research data, she had been one of only 18 tenured professors in MIT's Department of Advanced Mathematical Physics. She had published groundbreaking papers on structural dynamics, consulted for NASA on spacecraft calculations, and developed computational models so precise they were used worldwide to ensure that bridges didn't collapse, buildings didn't fall, and aircraft didn't fail catastrophically. Her crime had been born from frustration with a system that valued funding over discovery. When her research into seismic resonance patterns was denied federal funding because it challenged established engineering practices, Elena had started falsifying preliminary results to secure private grants that would allow her to complete work she knew could save thousands of lives during major earthquakes. The investigation revealed fabricated datasets worth over $3 million in research grants. What Elena hadn't expected was how losing access to advanced computing resources would affect her understanding of mathematics itself. For over 3 decades, her work had been supported by supercomputers and specialized software. In prison, she was reduced to working with pencil and paper, solving problems through pure mathematical reasoning rather than computational brute force. For 2 years, Elena had worked in the prison laundry while her mind worked through mathematical problems that had no connection to the mundane tasks her hands performed. She watched her ability to access complex mathematical literature fade, felt her connection to current research developments disappear, and gradually accepted that she would never again contribute to the mathematical knowledge that had been her life's passion. The opportunity to work in the prison library came through administrative oversight. The facility needed someone with educational credentials to help organize technical materials and assist with GED preparation programs. Elena's MIT background qualified her, even though the library's basic mathematical texts were impossibly distant from the graduate-level research that had defined her academic career. Elena started by helping inmates with basic mathematics required for GED testing, legal calculations related to sentencing and parole eligibility, and financial planning for after release. The work was elementary compared to the theoretical physics she had once explored, but it was satisfying in ways she hadn't anticipated. Mathematics applied to immediate human problems rather than abstract scientific questions. Word of Elena's capabilities spread through Millbrook quickly. Inmates approached her with mathematical problems that carried practical significance, calculating compound interest on debt payments, determining statistical odds for legal appeals, analyzing numerical patterns in everything from commissary prices to guard shift schedules. Marcus Calculator Rodriguez had controlled information flow and strategic planning in Cell Block D for over 7 years through intellectual intimidation and practical problem solving. At 5 feet 10 inches with a lean build, Calculator's influence came from his ability to analyze situations, predict outcomes, and devise solutions to problems that left other inmates confused and frustrated. Calculator had earned his nickname through his uncanny ability to rapidly perform complex mental calculations that helped other inmates understand legal sentence calculations and financial planning for life after release. He had taught himself mathematics during previous incarcerations, developing computational skills through necessity rather than formal education, and had built his reputation on being able to solve practical problems requiring numerical precision. What bothered Calculator about Elena's mathematical work wasn't the activity itself, it was how her formal academic training made his self-taught abilities seem primitive by comparison. Elena's advanced capabilities represented a potential threat to the intellectual authority that had taken him years to establish, but Calculator was struggling with something that had consumed him for months. His son Marcus Jr., course-failing performance at MIT, where the 25-year-old engineering student was struggling with advanced mathematics that could determine whether he graduated with the degree that represented the family's only hope for breaking the cycle of incarceration that had defined 3 generations of Rodriguez men. The confrontation came when Elena was working through differential equations that helped her maintain mental sharpness. Calculator appeared at her table without warning, his presence immediately changing the quiet space into territory where dangerous conversations about intellectual authority and family legacy could unfold. "If it isn't Millbrook's newest mathematics professor," Calculator announced, "I hear you've been turning this library into some kind of MIT classroom." "I help inmates with basic mathematical problems," Elena said simply. "Men bring me calculations they need to understand, legal issues, financial planning, educational requirements. I try to explain the mathematical principles involved using whatever resources are available here." "Mathematical principles," Calculator repeated, settling into the chair across from Elena. "You're not just helping people with basic arithmetic, you're working on graduate-level mathematics that most people in here couldn't understand if they studied for years." His voice carried curiosity rather than direct threat. "Mathematics is mathematics," Elena said calmly. "The principles that govern complex theoretical problems are the same ones that apply to practical calculations. Understanding advanced concepts often makes it easier to explain simple ones clearly, because you can see the underlying patterns that connect everything together." Calculator moved closer to Elena's notebook, scanning equations that represented mathematical concepts far beyond anything he had encountered. "Underlying patterns that connect everything together," he said thoughtfully. "That's either the most profound thing I've heard in here, or the most pretentious. I'm trying to figure out which one it is." "Mathematics reveals relationships that aren't always obvious," Elena replied. "When you understand how different types of problems connect to each other, you can solve new challenges by applying familiar patterns. But sometimes the connections are subtle, and missing them can lead to catastrophic errors that aren't apparent until it's too late to fix them." "Catastrophic errors," Calculator said, his voice smaller. "You sound like you speak from experience. What kind of mathematical mistakes cause catastrophes?" "Engineering failures, mostly," Elena said quietly. "When mathematical models don't account for all the variables that affect real-world systems, structures can fail in ways that kill people. Bridge collapses, building failures, aircraft accidents, many result from computational errors that seemed minor until they compounded into disasters. My son Marcus is struggling with structural engineering mathematics at MIT," Calculator said suddenly, the admission escaping before he could reconsider. "Advanced calculus, differential equations, stress analysis, stuff that's way beyond anything I ever learned to calculate." The personal revelation transformed their intellectual confrontation into something more vulnerable. "How is he struggling?" Elena asked gently, recognizing the pain behind Calculator's admission that his mathematical abilities weren't sufficient to help his son succeed. "He sends me his homework sometimes," Calculator replied, "tries to explain the problems he's working on, asks for help with concepts I've never seen before. I can do arithmetic, basic algebra, even some statistics, but this MIT-level engineering mathematics is like a foreign language. I can't help him, and I think he's starting to give up." "Structural engineering mathematics," Elena said thoughtfully. "That's actually one of my specializations. I've published papers on structural dynamics, consulted with engineering firms on stress analysis problems, developed computational models for seismic resistance. I could review your son's coursework, help identify where he's struggling, provide explanations that might help him understand the underlying concepts." Calculator's expression cycled through surprise, hope, and suspicious caution. "You would do that? Spend your time helping some kid you've never met with mathematics problems? What would you want in return?" "I wouldn't want anything in return," Elena said honestly. "I became a mathematician because I wanted to solve problems that help people. Your son is trying to learn skills that will let him build things that make communities safer and stronger. That's exactly the kind of application I hoped my knowledge would serve." Over the following week, Calculator began bringing Elena copies of mathematical problems that his son had shared during phone conversations. The work was challenging even by MIT standards: complex differential equations that modeled stress distribution in architectural structures, advanced calculus applications that determined load-bearing requirements for civil engineering projects, mathematical physics that analyzed how buildings would respond to seismic forces during major earthquakes. But as Elena worked through Marcus Jr.'s coursework, she began to notice something troubling. The mathematical models his professors were requiring students to use were elegant and computationally sophisticated, but they contained fundamental assumptions about material stress responses that Elena's research had proven inaccurate. The mathematical frameworks being taught at MIT were based on theoretical models that didn't account for real-world variables that could cause catastrophic structural failures. The discovery was devastating. Marcus Jr. was struggling not because he lacked mathematical ability, but because he was intuitively recognizing that something was wrong with the theoretical foundations he was being taught.
His professors were requiring him to accept mathematical models that contradicted physical reality, and his engineering instincts were rebelling against approaches that felt fundamentally flawed. "There's a serious problem with your son's coursework," Elena told Calculator. "The mathematical models his professors are using to analyze structural stress are based on assumptions that don't hold true in real-world applications. If engineers use these calculations to design actual buildings and bridges, the structures could fail catastrophically during earthquakes or other extreme events." "You're saying the mathematics they're teaching at MIT is wrong?" Calculator asked slowly. "That one of the most prestigious engineering schools in the world is using calculations that could get people killed? I'm saying the theoretical foundations are outdated," Elena explained. "The mathematical models were developed decades ago, when we understood less about how materials behave under extreme stress. Recent research has identified variables that the classical equations don't account for, but academic institutions are slow to update curricula." Elena spent the next several hours explaining to Calculator exactly why the MIT coursework contained mathematical errors that could prove catastrophic if applied to real engineering projects. Using basic diagrams and simplified equations, she demonstrated how classical stress analysis failed to account for resonance frequencies that could cause structural failure during seismic events, material fatigue patterns that developed differently than theoretical models predicted, and load distribution dynamics that weren't captured by traditional mathematical approaches. The mathematical flaws were systematic, pervasive, and potentially lethal when applied to real-world construction projects. "This is insane," Calculator said as he began to understand the implications of Elena's analysis. "You're telling me that every building designed using these MIT calculations could be vulnerable to collapse during major earthquakes? That engineers are being taught mathematics that could kill thousands of people if there's ever a serious seismic event?" The horror in his voice reflected his growing comprehension that mathematical errors could have consequences far beyond failed examinations. Elena's revelations were transforming his understanding of education from abstract knowledge acquisition into life-and-death professional responsibility. Buildings designed using these outdated models would be significantly more vulnerable to failure than structures designed using corrected mathematical approaches, Elena confirmed. The difference between accurate and inaccurate stress analysis could determine whether a building survives an earthquake or collapses and kills everyone inside. "I've seen preliminary calculations suggesting that buildings designed with corrected mathematical models could withstand seismic forces 30% more effectively than structures built using classical approaches." Her professional composure couldn't completely mask the frustration she felt about institutional resistance to mathematical truth. Calculator was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through the practical implications of Elena's revelations about mathematical education and public safety. The conversation had evolved far beyond his original concerns about intellectual authority or his son's academic struggles. Elena was describing systemic failures in mathematical education that could affect millions of people living in earthquake-prone regions throughout California, Japan, and other seismically active areas worldwide. "My son could help fix this," he said finally. "If we can teach him the correct mathematical approaches, if we can help him understand why the MIT methods are flawed, he could become the kind of engineer who designs buildings that actually protect people instead of just meeting outdated academic standards." The possibility seemed to transform Calculator's understanding of his son's education from obstacle into opportunity. Instead of viewing Marcus Jr.'s struggles as personal failures or institutional limitations, Calculator began to see them as evidence of intellectual integrity. His son's intuitive resistance to mathematical approaches that didn't accurately reflect physical reality. Elena's analysis suggested that Marcus Jr. was struggling precisely because he possessed the engineering instincts that would make him effective at designing structures that could withstand real-world stresses rather than just satisfying theoretical requirements. Over the following months, an extraordinary partnership developed between Elena and Calculator that transformed both their understanding of mathematical education and their roles within the prison community. The intellectual gang leader didn't abandon his position of influence, but he began using his organizational skills to protect and expand Elena's educational programs. Instead of viewing advanced mathematics as threatening to prison stability, Calculator started promoting mathematical literacy as practical preparation for legitimate careers that could benefit entire communities after release. Most remarkably, Calculator became Elena's most dedicated student, approaching advanced mathematics with the same systematic intensity that had made him effective as a problem solver and strategic thinker. His intuitive understanding of patterns and relationships proved extraordinary when combined with Elena's formal training, and together they began developing educational materials that could help other inmates understand how mathematical knowledge could translate to legitimate career opportunities that served community needs rather than exploiting systemic weaknesses. But Elena's most significant contribution came when she helped Calculator develop a comprehensive explanation of structural engineering mathematics that his son could use to understand not just how to solve MIT coursework problems, but why the mathematical models being taught were inadequate, and what corrections would produce more accurate results. Together, they created detailed mathematical proofs that demonstrated the flaws in classical stress analysis approaches, developed alternative computational frameworks that accounted for variables ignored by traditional methods, and designed educational materials that could help engineering students understand the life and death importance of mathematical accuracy. The materials Elena and Calculator developed were revolutionary in their practical application of advanced mathematical concepts to real-world engineering challenges. Using rigorous mathematical analysis, they identified specific weaknesses in building codes that relied on outdated theoretical models, proposed corrections that would significantly improve structural safety during seismic events, and created educational frameworks that could help engineering students understand that mathematical precision wasn't just academic requirement but moral obligation to the communities that would depend on their professional expertise. Calculator's transformation extended far beyond his relationship with Elena and his son's education. He began applying mathematical analysis to every aspect of prison life, developing statistical models that help predict and prevent conflicts between inmates, creating financial planning systems that help men prepare for successful re-entry into civilian life, and establishing educational programs that taught basic mathematical literacy as foundation for legitimate career development. His intellectual authority, previously based on superior problem-solving abilities, evolved into genuine leadership focused on community improvement rather than personal power. 6 months after their first confrontation, Calculator approached Elena with news that demonstrated how completely their collaboration had transformed his son's academic trajectory and professional prospects. Marcus passed his advanced mathematics courses, he said, his voice carrying pride and amazement in equal measure. But more than that, he's been sharing your corrected mathematical approaches with his professors and classmates. They're starting to question whether the standard MIT curriculum adequately prepares engineers for real-world structural challenges. Some faculty members are requesting copies of your mathematical proofs to review for potential curriculum modifications.
Elena recognized the profound significance of Calculator's report, not just for his family, but for the broader application of mathematical knowledge to public safety challenges that affected millions of people living in earthquake-prone regions. Your son is in a unique position, Elena told Calculator. As someone who understands both the classical approaches and the corrected methodologies, he can help bridge the gap between academic theory and practical engineering. He could become a leader in developing safer construction standards that prevent catastrophic failures and save thousands of lives during major seismic events. The recognition that Marcus Jr. could play a pivotal role in reforming engineering education and improving public safety transformed Calculator's understanding of his own incarceration from personal failure into preparation for family contribution to society. His years of developing mathematical skills, his experience with systematic analysis and problem-solving, and his collaboration with Elena had equipped him to support his son's professional development in ways that could benefit entire communities. Prison had become educational opportunity rather than just punishment or lost time. The program Elena and Calculator developed together became known throughout the correctional system as Applied Mathematics for Public Safety, an approach to mathematical education that emphasized practical applications of advanced concepts to problems that affected community welfare rather than just individual advancement. Calculator's credibility as a problem solver and strategic thinker gave the program legitimacy with inmates who might otherwise have dismissed academic mathematics as irrelevant to their practical concerns or post-release career prospects. Their educational approach attracted attention from correctional officials, university researchers, and engineering professionals who recognized that the mathematical insights Elena and Calculator were developing had implications far beyond prison education programs. The collaboration demonstrated that advanced mathematical knowledge could be effectively transmitted through peer education models that honored students' practical experience while providing rigorous theoretical foundations for understanding complex technical problems. When Elena was released after serving her full sentence, she left behind more than just a successful educational program. She had helped create a culture where intellectual curiosity was valued as essential for community service, where mathematical knowledge was understood as a tool for protecting public safety rather than just academic achievement, where the most respected leader in the facility was someone who had learned to use analysis and problem-solving abilities to build community capacity rather than exploit systemic weaknesses for personal advantage. Calculator still had 4 years remaining on his sentence, but he spent that time differently than he had spent the previous 7 years of incarceration. He earned certifications in mathematical education and engineering support services, developed partnerships with universities that could provide continued learning opportunities for inmates with analytical abilities, and created comprehensive re-entry programs that helped men understand how their intellectual skills could translate to legitimate careers that served community needs rather than individual enrichment at community expense. Most significantly, Calculator established relationships with engineering firms, construction companies, and building safety organizations that were interested in hiring former inmates who had demonstrated mathematical competency and commitment to public safety applications. His reputation within the prison system enabled him to connect educational achievement with legitimate employment opportunities, creating pathways from incarceration to meaningful community contribution that broke cycles of recidivism through intellectual engagement rather than just behavior modification. 2 years after Elena's release, Calculator sent her a letter that demonstrated the profound transformation of someone who had discovered that mathematical knowledge was most powerful when used to protect rather than exploit vulnerable communities. Professor Elena, the letter read, I wanted to tell you that Marcus graduated summa cum laude from MIT and has been accepted into a graduate program focusing on seismic engineering safety. But the most important thing is that he's working with building code committees to implement the mathematical corrections you identified. They estimate that the new standards could prevent building collapses that would have killed thousands of people during major earthquakes. The letter continued with details that revealed the far-reaching impact of Elena's mathematical insights and their collaboration on educational methodology. Marcus has been hired by a firm that specializes in earthquake-resistant construction, and they're using your corrected stress analysis models for projects throughout California and internationally. The mathematical approaches you developed are being incorporated into engineering curricula at universities across the country. The company wants to hire inmates from our program who demonstrate mathematical competency and commitment to public safety applications. You didn't just help one student pass his courses, you may have saved more lives than we'll ever be able to count, and you've created career pathways that help men transition from incarceration to meaningful community service. Elena kept that letter framed in her office at the university where she had been hired to teach engineering mathematics and structural safety analysis. It served as a reminder that the most important mathematical discoveries were never just abstract theoretical achievements, they were practical tools that could protect human lives when applied with precision, integrity, and understanding of their real-world implications. The collaboration with Calculator had taught her that knowledge gained significance through sharing, that expertise served its highest purpose when it empowered others to contribute to community welfare, and that the most satisfying mathematical solutions were those that addressed human needs rather than just intellectual challenges. Years later, when engineers brought Elena structural analysis problems that required mathematical solutions to prevent catastrophic failures, she would tell them about the prison library, where she learned that knowledge without application is meaningless, that theoretical insights gain significance only when they serve human needs, that the highest calling of mathematical expertise is ensuring that structures protect rather than endanger the people who depend on them. She would describe how collaboration with Calculator had transformed both their understanding of mathematical education and their commitment to public safety applications. Most of all, Elena would tell her students about the lesson she learned in that makeshift classroom, that mathematical truth is meaningless unless it serves human flourishing. Numbers don't lie, but they reveal their power only when someone has the courage to apply them correctly, the integrity to challenge established methods when evidence demands change, and the wisdom to understand that every equation is ultimately about protecting people whose lives depend on getting the calculations exactly right, one precise solution at a time.